So we start with breaking news. 8 children and a security guard have been killed after a 14-year-old boy opened fire in a school classroom in the Serbian capital, Belgrade.
Chaos and panic at a Nevada middle school after a student opened fire, and tonight a math teacher who lost his life in the shooting is being called a hero for putting his life on the line, trying to protect children who were in the line of fire.
March 24th, 1998, started like any regular day for students at Westside Middle School in Arkansas, but by 12:41 p.m., everything changed forever. 2 young boys, just 11 and 13 years old, executed a carefully planned ambush that would claim 5 lives and wound 10 others. But they're not alone. Here are the 10 youngest school shooters in the world. February 29, 2000, a 6-year-old boy walked into Buell Elementary with a stolen .32 caliber handgun, pointed it at another student, Kayla Rowland, and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the school's hallway, but that marked the moment a first grader became one of the youngest school shooters in American history. Earlier that morning in Mount Morris Township, Michigan, the air was thick with tension as police radios crackled about a shooting at Buell Elementary School. Behind bars in Genesee County Jail, Dedrick Owens listened to the news, his heart sinking. When he heard the school's name, he knew. His 6-year-old son, product of an environment surrounded by drugs, guns, and chaos, had done the unimaginable. Dedrick's journey to this moment was paved with broken promises and missed opportunities. Once a family man, he and his wife ran a crack business from their home, exposing their children to a world of violence and addiction from birth. The day the boy was born, he went from hospital to crack house, one investigator would later say. By the time his son pulled the trigger, Dedrick was already serving time for violating parole, a pattern his family couldn't escape. The boy's mother, Tamarla Owens, struggled with her own demons. A week before the shooting, she'd been evicted, leaving her sons with their uncle in a house notorious for drug activity. The murder weapon, a .32 caliber semi-automatic handgun, was just another commodity in a place where guns and drugs were traded like candy. School officials recognized the boy as high risk and placed him in a new counseling program, but the system failed him. Days before the shooting, he'd already been suspended for fighting. The night before, he fought with Kayla Rowland, and that morning, he brought the stolen gun to school. Witnesses would later describe the shooting as sounding like a balloon popping. When the teacher returned to the classroom, students told her what happened. Kayla, standing in front of a mirror, had been shot in the chest. The boy reportedly said,
"I don't like you,"
before pulling the trigger. Kayla's last words were reportedly, "I'm going to die." Police found the boy calmly playing with a typewriter and drawing pictures at the station. At first, he claimed another classmate shot Kayla, but after a happy meal and gentle questioning, he admitted he'd found the gun at his uncle's house and accidentally shot Kayla. Now, the state prosecutor Arthur Bush faced an unprecedented dilemma. The law didn't allow charging a 6-year-old with murder. Besides, the boy couldn't comprehend death or intent. So instead of holding the boy accountable, Bush decided to focus on the adults who failed him. Jamel James, the man who left the gun accessible, was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. He served 2.5 years. His mother, Tamarla Owens, faced neglect charges, but lucky for her, that case was eventually dismissed. Meanwhile, the community grappled with what to do next. Sheriff Robert Pickle argued the boy was still dangerous, warning,
"If they say he doesn't know what he did, and let's assume that's true, he won't know if he does it again."
Ultimately, the court placed the boy with his maternal aunt as his journey through foster care, and public schools was closely monitored. By 2011, he was receiving state support and seeking employment, but the scars remained because in 2012, he faced new legal troubles, a stark reminder that childhood trauma doesn't simply fade away. But that's not even as shocking as the next case we have on our list. January 6, 2023, the chaos at Richneck Elementary, Newport News, Virginia, began in a seemingly ordinary first-grade classroom. But by the end of the day, the world would be shocked by what happened, asking what in the world would lead a 6-year-old boy to bring a loaded 9mm pistol to school and fire at his teacher. The boy in question had a documented history of alarming behavior. Reports detail incidents where he cursed at staff, attempted to whip other students with his belt, and even choked a teacher her so severely she needed intervention. In one particularly disturbing event, he approached a teacher from behind, locked his arms around her neck, and pulled her backwards. That incident resulted in his temporary removal from school. But clearly, the underlying issues were never properly addressed. Despite this troubling history, the child was placed in a classroom with 23 other students. Teachers and staff repeatedly raised concerns about his behavior, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. The day before the shooting, he slammed his teacher, Abby Zwerner's cell phone, breaking it and earning a one-day suspension. On that fateful day, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. 3 different students reported to staff that he had a gun. Teachers and staff expressed concern. One teacher even searched his backpack, but found nothing because the weapon was hidden elsewhere. The former assistant principal, Ebony Parker, received 4 separate warnings about the boy having a firearm. Each time, she failed to act. Then, during a routine lesson, the boy stood up, pointed the gun at Ms. Zwerner, and pulled the trigger. The bullet passed through her hand and lodged in her chest. Despite her injuries, she managed to usher her students to safety before collapsing.
But the tragedy didn't end with the shooting. The investigation revealed a horrifying pattern of neglect by school administrators.
Records were missing, disciplinary actions were downplayed, and crucial evidence was either poorly documented or intentionally obscured. The grand jury report was damning. It described a shocking lack of response from administrators and a disturbing pattern of ignoring red flags. The consequences extended far beyond the classroom. The assistant principal, Ebony Parker, faced 8 felony counts of child abuse, disregard for life, 1 for each bullet in the gun. Each count carries a potential 5-year prison sentence. The school's principal lost her position, and the district superintendent was removed. Most notably, the boy's mother, Deja Nicole Taylor, was convicted on multiple counts related to child neglect and illegal firearm possession. She received a combined sentence of nearly 4 years. The aftermath brought sweeping changes to the school. Weapons detection systems were installed at all elementary schools. 2 full-time security officers were assigned to Richneck Elementary. Students now carry only clear backpacks. These measures came too late for Ms. Zwerner, but they represent a hard-learned lesson about the importance of taking threats seriously. And let's just say her $40 million lawsuit against the school board is very legit. April 12, 1994. The quiet playground at Margaret Leary Elementary in Butte, Montana, erupted with panic as 10-year-old James Osmondson fired 3 shots. His target, bullies who tormented him for months, but instead he struck Jeremy Bullock in the head, a tragic mistake that cost a young life and forever changed the community's sense of safety. For context, Osmondson's background was already troubled. His parents, both suffering from AIDS, had divorced. His mother was named a suspect in his stepfather's death, a case that remained unresolved. Osmondson was bullied relentlessly at school and in his neighborhood, felt cornered by circumstances no child should ever face. That morning, the playground was filled with laughter and typical schoolyard energy. Meanwhile, Osmondson carried a pistol, desperate to end his suffering. The shots he fired missed his intended targets, landing 1 bullet in a student's backpack, another passing through someone's coat without injury, but the third found Jeremy Bullock, who died. Butte was rocked by the tragedy. Hundreds attended Jeremy's funeral, with so many people that half had to watch via a television screen in another room. The community responded by building the Jeremy Bullock Memorial Soccer Fields and launching anti-bullying programs that would have become models across the state. But while the town grieved, Osmondson's life took a different path. Instead of prison, he received intensive therapy, and under the care of Butte lawyer Brad Belk, who became his guardian, Osmondson went through inpatient treatment, then lived in a foster home with trained counselors. He completed high school, found a job, and planned to start college, which, if we're being honest, is a remarkable turnaround for someone who had nearly lost everything at just age 10. May 27, 1975. The Pitcher School in Detroit became the setting for what would be one of the youngest perpetrated school shootings in American history. That morning, the sun rose over a city that had no idea a mere 9-year-old would soon commit a crime that even today stuns anyone who hears the story. The 2 boys involved were no strangers to conflict. They attended the same school, and their relationship was marred by repeated altercations. Their fights weren't the playful scuffles that sometimes break out among school children. These were serious enough enough that staff and other students noticed the tension mounting between them. On this particular day, however, the pattern of schoolyard arguments took a deadly turn. The two boys, their names protected for privacy, had a major confrontation on school grounds. It was an argument like so many before, but this one left the 9-year-old seething with an anger far too powerful for his age. Instead of cooling off, the younger boy left the school and made his way home. What happened next revealed just how dangerously accessible firearms were in some households during that era. The 9-year-old retrieved a rifle from his house. There was no hesitation in his actions. He returned to the school, weapon in hand, with a chilling determination, the target of his wrath, the 13-year-old classmate who never saw it coming. The shot rang out, echoing through the neighborhood, and the older boy fell to the ground. The immediate aftermath was a scene of chaos and disbelief. Teachers and students struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The police arrived quickly. The damage was already done. A child barely out of elementary school had ended a life and forever altered his own. The investigation that followed focused as much on the boy's access to the firearm as on the act itself. Authorities discovered that the 9-year-old didn't fully grasp the permanence of death or the consequences of his actions. Legal proceedings were complicated by the boy's age. He was too young to be tried as an adult under Michigan law. Instead, the juvenile justice system took over, focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment. The community struggled with mixed feelings, outrage over the violence, but also a recognition that this was a child who needed help more than traditional justice. The school district faced intense scrutiny about how such a young child could have access to a firearm, and the repeated conflicts between the two boys. Policies and procedures came under review, particularly regarding conflict resolution and student supervision. This case became a grim benchmark in American school shooting history. It forced educators, law enforcement, and parents to confront uncomfortable questions about gun access, childhood anger, and the responsibilities of adults in preventing such tragedies. Mitchell Scott Johnson was just 13 years old when he became one of the youngest school shooters in American history. Born in Rochester, Minnesota on August 11, 1984, his early life was marked by turbulence and instability. At age 7, his parents divorced, and he relocated to Jonesboro, Arkansas, with his mother and brother. His mother remarried to a man she met while working as a correctional officer, bringing a new dynamic into Mitchell's life. Despite this new family structure, Johnson's behavioral problems began to surface early on, and they would only intensify as he approached adolescence. School records paint a troubling picture. During the same year as the West Side Middle School shooting, Johnson was assigned in-school suspension 3 separate times. More disturbing, he faced criminal charges for molesting a girl. Classmates described him as a bully who frequently boasted about gang affiliations. He developed a reputation for talking about violence. With one particularly chilling comment, Johnson told a friend he had a lot of killing to do. The day before the attack, he ominously suggested to classmates they would know the following day whether they were destined to live or die. Johnson's fascination with firearms was also well known. He often talked about wanting to join the Bloods gang and expressed a general hostility toward others. His circle of friends was small, but he shared the school bus with Andrew Golden, who would later become his partner in the deadly ambush. Despite their age difference, Johnson in 7th grade and Golden in 6th bonded over shared interests in violence and firearms. In the months leading up to the shooting, Johnson's behavior grew more erratic. He began making increasingly specific threats, including one directed at a former girlfriend who had broken up with him. Despite these warning signs, no effective intervention was made. Both Johnson and Golden began planning the attack with chilling precision, stealing weapons from Golden's grandfather's house and stockpiling over 2,000 rounds of ammunition. The night before the attack, Johnson and Golden packed Johnson's mother's Dodge Caravan with camping supplies, snacks, the stolen arsenal, and survival gear. Their plan wasn't just to attack the school. They intended to escape into the woods and disappear. The next morning, they deliberately missed the school bus and drove the van to West Side Middle School. Golden pulled the fire alarm during 5th period, and as students and teachers evacuated, the two opened fire from their hidden position in the woods. The aftermath was devastating. 5 people killed, including a teacher and 4 students, and 10 others wounded. Johnson and Golden were apprehended by police just 10 minutes after the shooting began. Their van, parked nearly half a mile away, was loaded with supplies for a planned getaway. Now, during his trial, Johnson read a letter of apology, but claimed he hadn't targeted anyone specifically. He was tried as a juvenile, with the maximum penalty being confinement until age age 21. Johnson served just 7 years in prison before being released on his 21st birthday in 2005. However, his release sparked widespread outrage as the victims' families watched him walk free. Plus, Johnson's post-prison life quickly spiraled downward, as in 2007, he was arrested for possession of marijuana and a loaded weapon. This arrest led to federal weapons charges, as he was prohibited from owning firearms. He pleaded not guilty, but was released on bond. In 2008, he was found guilty of possessing a weapon while being a drug user. Days later, he was arrested again for possession of marijuana and using a stolen credit card. In September 2008, Johnson received a 4-year federal prison sentence for the weapons and drug charges. The judge expressed frustration at Johnson's failure to reform, telling him,
"No matter your sentence, you still have a life. Those killed in 1998 do not."
In October 2008, Johnson pleaded guilty to felony theft charges for stealing a disabled man's debit card and using it to buy food. He also admitted to possessing marijuana at the time of his arrest. By November 2008, Johnson, then 24 years old, was sentenced to 12 years in prison for theft and drug possession. Although he could have faced up to 30 years, the sentence was reduced because his juvenile record had been expunged. In January 2009, Johnson received an additional 6-year sentence for another theft charge, bringing his total state sentence to 18 years. He was eligible for parole in 2011, but would then face a consecutive 4-year federal sentence. Despite his troubled past, Johnson was released from prison in July 2015 and placed in a drug rehabilitation program in Texas. By 2017, the victims' families had successfully sued Johnson and Golden, winning a $150 million judgment, though it was largely symbolic, as neither had significant assets. November 19, 1999, in Deming, New Mexico. A single gunshot echoes through the halls of Deming Middle School. In the school lobby, a student named Araceli Tena collapses. Standing nearby, Victor Cordova Jr. holds a .22 caliber pistol, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Victor was no stranger to hardship. Earlier that year, his mother had died of cancer, a loss that left the young boy deeply depressed. He lived in Palomas, Mexico, just across the border, but attended school in Deming as a U.S. citizen. Despite his young age, those who knew him described him as intelligent but troubled, carrying the weight of grief that seemed far too heavy for his small frame. That morning, Victor brought the pistol to school with a tragic plan. According to his attorney, he intended to use the gun on himself, but as he entered the crowded lobby, something went terribly wrong. He was bumped by another student, and the gun accidentally discharged. The bullet struck Araceli Tena in the back of the head. Immediately, panic erupted. Victor, still holding the weapon, pointed it at police and school officials before finally surrendering. Emergency responders rushed Araceli to Thomason Hospital in El Paso, but despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries 2 days later. The community was stunned. A young life lost, another shattered, all in a moment of chaos and confusion. Victor's arrest made headlines across the country. At just 12 years old, he became one of the youngest individuals ever charged with murder in New Mexico. The case raised difficult questions about juvenile justice, mental health, and the profound impact of grief and trauma on young minds. In court, Victor pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder and 11 counts of aggravated assault. His defense argued that he had brought the gun to school with the intention of ending his own life and not harming anyone else, but the devastating outcome could not be ignored. Judge V. Lee Vesely sentenced Victor to 2 years in juvenile detention, the maximum allowed under state law for someone his age. However, the prosecution sought 1-year extensions that could keep him in state custody until his 21st birthday, if approved by a judge each year. It was a sentence that tried to balance justice with compassion for a child who had already suffered so much. The aftermath of the shooting left deep scars on the community. Araceli's family mourned their loss, with her father stating through tears,
"He destroyed our life, mine and my family's life. Nothing is ever going to be the same."
Said that 2 boys who were wounded in today's attack are now in stable condition, and it looks as if they will survive. But a middle school math teacher has been killed, and the alleged attacker in this case has taken his life.
October 21st, 2013, Sparks Middle School, Nevada. The quiet morning routine shattered as the first shots rang out near the basketball courts. Students scattered in panic. Teachers rushed to protect their classrooms, and a tragedy unfolded that would shock the nation. Jose Reyes was just 12 years old, a 7th grader who struggled with speech problems since kindergarten and often felt isolated from his classmates. His parents, originally from Mexico, ran a local restaurant and tried to create a good life for their 3 children. But beneath the surface, Jose wrestled with depression and social challenges that went largely unnoticed. 3 days before the shooting, his father took him to see a psychotherapist. The doctor noted clear signs of depressive disorder, prescribing a generic form of Prozac. Jose mentioned being harassed at school, called names, and feeling like an outcast, but nothing in that visit hinted at what he planned.
A child had a weapon and pulled that weapon out, was asking for a certain teacher.
That Monday morning, Jose arrived at school carrying his father's Ruger SR9C 9mm semi-automatic handgun. He had 2 magazines, one with 17 rounds, one with 10, and a plan that would leave lasting scars on the community. As students gathered on the basketball courts before classes, Jose opened fire. His first victim was KJ Kersey, a fellow student who was shot in the shoulder. The chaos intensified as students screamed and ran for cover. Michael Lansbury, a 45-year-old math teacher and former Marine, saw what was happening and immediately intervened. He confronted Jose, trying to protect the students and de-escalate the situation. Jose fired at Lansbury, striking him fatally. The teacher's actions bought precious seconds for students to escape, but cost him his life. Witnesses later called Lansbury a hero, someone who put his life on the line to shield children from danger.
All he thought about was getting the other children safe. In my book, he's a hero, and he will always be a hero.
Jose then fired 2 shots at another teacher, Mr. Perez, but missed both times. And as Mason Davis, another student, tried to help Lansbury, Jose shot him in the abdomen. With the courtyard cleared and police closing in, Jose turned the gun on himself, ending his life. The aftermath revealed conflicting motives. Jose left 2 handwritten suicide notes, one expressing anger over bullying and a desire for revenge, the other downplaying any connection to bullying or violent video games. His phone contained images of the Columbine shooters, and his family computer showed searches for Super Columbine Massacre role-playing game. Investigators found 47 violent-themed video games in his collection, while some students confirmed minor teasing incidents, like being called names or accused of wetting his pants after water was poured on him. Police found no evidence of severe bullying. The investigation also revealed Jose had recently started showing signs of autism. Meanwhile, Jose's parents faced intense scrutiny, but police found no evidence they knew he could access the gun. The weapon had been stored in a kitchen cabinet, supposedly out of reach. In the end, no charges were filed against them. But after all those years, the Sparks Middle School shooting remains a stark reminder of the complex factors that can lead to tragedy. Jose's story is a cautionary tale about unnoticed warning signs, the deadly consequences of untreated mental health issues, and the importance of school safety. March 2, 1987, in DeKalb, Missouri. The small rural junior high school hallways echoed with voices and laughter until 12-year-old Nathan Daniel Ferris walked into his 7th grade history class carrying a .45 caliber pistol. What happened next would become one of the youngest and most tragic school shooting incidents in American history. For context, Ferris, a heavyset boy who classmates called Chubby, had been the target of relentless bullying. He'd warned friends the previous Friday not to come to school on Monday, saying he would take care of them, but no one realized how serious his threat was. That morning, just before the teacher arrived, Ferris pulled his father's gun from a duffel bag and announced to his classmates,
"I'm going to shoot you."
The dozen students in the room huddled together in a corner, terrified, but 2 became his immediate focus. Timothy Perrin, 13, was one of Nathan's friends. Seeing the gun pointed at others, Timothy leapt to try and wrestle the weapon away. The attempt cost him his life, but likely saved many others. According to investigators, Timothy was shot once in the stomach and then suffered a glancing head wound. He managed to crawl from the classroom into a hallway before collapsing. Meanwhile, with the teacher just outside the door, Nathan turned the gun on himself, standing in front of the teacher's desk. The classroom was left with 5 spent casings on the floor and 2 live rounds still in the weapon. Both boys, who lived in nearby Rushville, were pronounced dead later at hospitals in St. Joseph. Neither had been known as a troublemaker. The superintendent said,
"Neither of the boys was known to be be a problem student.
But the impact on the small school community was immediate and devastating. A crisis response team of counselors, psychologists, and clergy from St. Joseph's Heartland Hospital System descended on the school. Teachers, staff, and students met in groups and individually to process the tragedy. The superintendent decided that classes would resume as soon as possible, saying,
"They say it is best that we get right back into our routine as soon as possible."
The teacher, Norman Walton, was just outside the classroom when the shooting began. As Barbara Phillips, 17, sat in the school library across the hall, she heard 4 shots. Tim came out of the room crawling, and he was bleeding really bad, she remembered. "He doesn't look like the kind of kid that would do this kind of thing," she added. Authorities found 5 spent casings in the classroom and 2 live rounds still in the weapon, which belonged to Ferris's father. About a dozen students witnessed the terrifying incident unfold. Timothy Perrin's heroic actions likely prevented a larger tragedy. As authorities later said, it looks like the Perrin boy was an unsung hero. His quick thinking may have saved many lives that day. As the investigation concluded, authorities admitted,
"There's no way we can come up with a motive because of the demise of Nathan Ferris. We have no way of knowing what was going through his head at the time of the shooting."
But the warning signs, the bullying, the threats, the easy access to a deadly weapon were all tragically present.
Breaking news overseas, a teenage boy opened fire at a school in Belgrade, Serbia, killing 8 and a school guard. 6 other kids and a teacher were hurt. Police say the 14-year-old shooter used his father's gun and had been planning the attack for a month. Authorities arrested him in the schoolyard.
May 3rd, 2023, a 13-year-old boy entered Vladislav Ribnikar Elementary School in Belgrade, Serbia, and opened fire, killing 9 students and a school security guard, wounding 6 others. Kosta Kekmanovic was an ordinary 7th grader, known to be quiet and academically successful. He had been a pupil at the school since 2019. What made this case so shocking was not just his age, too young to face criminal charges under Serbian law, but the chilling level of planning behind the attack. For about a month, Kosta had plotted the shooting. He created a list of classmates he intended to kill, mapped out classrooms, and even brought 2 pistols that belonged to his father. The weapons, legally owned by his father Vladimir, were reportedly locked in a safe, but Kosta had somehow gotten access to the codes. He'd been known to train at a shooting range with his father, a well-known radiologist. His mother, Miljana, an assistant professor, was also implicated in the case for child neglect. The attack started in the school hallway, where Kosta shot the security guard and 3 students. Then, he entered a history classroom, shooting the teacher and 5 more students. In total, he fired 57 shots before surrendering to police, calmly confessing to the shootings. The trauma on the school community was immense. Students fled in panic, teachers and emergency responders rushed in, and grief swept the nation. The court later convicted Kosta's parents. His father received 14.5 years for public safety violations and child neglect, and his mother was sentenced to 3 years. A shooting instructor who taught Kosta was also jailed for false testimony, but Kosta himself could not be tried due to his age. Instead, he was placed in a psychiatric institution for care and monitoring. The massacre sparked widespread outrage and sorrow. Serbia declared 3 days of national mourning. Protests erupted, demanding accountability and action against violence. The government introduced stricter gun control measures, lowered the criminal responsibility age from 14 to 12, and increased school security personnel. Families of the victims filed multiple civil lawsuits against Kosta, his parents, and the school. As the community struggled to heal, debates about mental health, gun safety, and parental responsibility dominated public discourse. The school itself underwent renovations. Police officers were stationed to protect students. But all in all, Kosta's case is a grim reminder of how even the youngest can cause unimaginable harm, especially when firearms fall into the wrong hands.